movements, and even her own dreams sometimes collided with her. Again her old nature asserted itself in her children. Lycurgus dipped into the cupboard between meals, and Aristides came home from school without shoes, leaving those important articles on the threshold for the delight of a barefooted walk down the ditches. Octavia and Cassandra were careless of their clothes. So, with but one exception, however much the prairie rose might have trimmed and pruned and trained their own matured luxuriance, the little shoots came up defiantly wild and straggling. That one exception was Clytemnestra Morpher, aged 15. She was the realization of her mother's immaculate conception: neat, orderly, and dull. It was an amiable weakness of Mrs. Morpher to imagine that Clytie was a consolation and model for Mliss. Following this fallacy, Mrs. Morpher threw Clytie at the head of Mliss when she was bad, and set her up before the child for adoration in her penitential moments. It was not, therefore, surprising to the master to hear that Clytie was coming to school, obviously as a favour to the master, and as an example for Mliss and others. For Clytie was quite a young lady. Inheriting her mother's physical peculiarities, and in obedience to the climatic laws of the Red Mountain region, she was an early bloomer. The youth of Smith's Pocket, to whom this kind of flower was rare, sighed for her in April, and languished in May. Enamoured swains haunted the schoolhouse at the hour of dismissal. A few were jealous of the master. Perhaps it was this latter circumstance that opened the master's eyes to another. He could not help noticing that Clytie was romantic, that in school she required a great deal of attention, that her pens were uniformly bad and wanted fixing, that she usually accompanied the request with a certain expectation in her eye that was somewhat disproportionate to the quality of service she verbally required, that she sometimes allowed the curves of her round, plump white arm to rest on his when he was writing her copies, that she always blushed and flung back her blond curls when she did so. I don't remember whether I have stated that the master was a young man. It's of little consequence, however. He had been severely educated in the school in which Clytie was taking her first lesson, and, on the whole, withstood the flexible curves and factitious glance like the fine young Spartan that he was. Perhaps an insufficient quality of food may have tended to this asceticism. He generally avoided Clytie, but one evening when she returned to the schoolhouse after something she had forgotten, and did not find it until the master walked home with her, I hear that he endeavoured to make himself particularly agreeable, partly from the fact, I imagine, that his conduct was adding gall and bitterness to the already overcharged hearts of Clytemnestra's admirers. The morning after this affecting episode, Mliss did not come to school. Noon came, but not Mliss. Questioning Clytie on the subject, it appeared that they had left for school together, but the wilful Mliss had taken another road. The afternoon brought her not. In the evening he called on Mrs. Morpher, whose motherly heart was really alarmed. Mr. Morpher had spent all day in search of her, without discovering a trace that might lead to her discovery. Aristides was summoned as a probable accomplice, but that equitable infant succeeded in impressing the household with his innocence. Mrs. Morpher entertained a vivid impression that the child would yet be found drowned in the ditch, or, what was almost as terrible, muddied and soiled beyond the redemption of soap and water. Sick at heart, the master returned to the schoolhouse. As he lit his lamp and seated himself at his desk, he found a note lying before him, addressed to himself, in Mliss's handwriting. It seemed to be written on a leaf torn from some old memorandum book, and, to prevent sacrilegious trifling, had been sealed with 6 broken wafers. Opening it almost tenderly, the master read as follows: Respected Sir, when you read this I am run away, never to come back, never, never, never. You can give my beads to Mary Jennings, and my America's Pride, a highly coloured lithograph from a tobacco box, to Sally Flanders. But don't you give anything to Clytie Morpher. Don't you dare to. Do you know what my opinion is of her? It is this: she is perfectly disgusting. That is all and no more at present from yours respectfully, Melissa Smith. The master sat pondering on this strange epistle till the moon lifted its bright face above the distant hills and illuminated the trail that led to the schoolhouse, beaten quite hard with the coming and going of little feet. Then, more satisfied in mind, he tore the missive into fragments and scattered them along the road. At sunrise the next morning he was picking his way through the palm-like fern and thick underbrush of the pine forest, starting the hare from its form and awakening a querulous protest from a few dissipated crows, who had evidently been making a night of it, and so came to the wooded ridge where he had once found Mliss. There he found the prostrate pine and tasseled branches, but the throne was vacant. As he drew nearer, what might have been some frightened animal started through the crackling limbs. It ran up the tossed arms of the fallen monarch and sheltered itself in some friendly foliage. The master, reaching the old seat, found the nest still warm. Looking up in the intertwining branches, he met the black eyes of the errant Mliss. They gazed at each other without speaking. She was first to break the silence. "What do you want?" she asked curtly. The master had decided on a course of action. "I want some crab apples," he said humbly. "Shan't have them. Go away. Why don't ye get them of Clytemnestra?" It seemed to be a relief to Mliss to express her contempt in additional syllables to that classical young woman's already long-drawn title. "Oh, you wicked thing!" "I am hungry, Lissy. I have eaten nothing since dinner yesterday. I am famished." And the young man, in a state of remarkable exhaustion, leaned against the tree. Melissa's heart was touched. In the bitter days of her gypsy life she had known the sensation he so artfully simulated. Overcome by his heart-broken tone, but not entirely divested of suspicion, she said, "Dig under the tree near the roots, and you'll find lots. But mind you don't tell." For Mliss had her hoards as well as the rats and squirrels. But the master, of course, was unable to find them, the effects of hunger probably blinding his senses. Mliss grew uneasy. At length she peered at him through the leaves in an elfish way, and questioned, "If I come down and give you some, you'll promise you won't touch me?" The master promised. "Hope you'll die if you do." The master accepted instant dissolution as a forfeit. Mliss slid down the tree. For a few moments nothing transpired but the munching of the pine nuts. "Do you feel better?" she asked, with some solicitude. The master confessed to a recuperated feeling, and then, gravely thanking her, proceeded to retrace his steps. As he expected, he had not gone far before she called him. He turned. She was standing there quite white, with tears in her widely opened orbs. The master felt that the right moment had come. Going up to her, he took both her hands, and looking in her tearful eyes, said gravely, "Lissy, do you remember the first evening you came to see me?" Lissy remembered. "You asked if you might come to school, for you wanted to learn something and be better, and I said—" "Come," responded the child, promptly. "What would you say if the master now came to you and said that he was lonely without his little scholar, and that he wanted her to come and teach him to be better?" The child hung her head for a few moments in silence. The master waited patiently. Tempted by the quiet, a hare ran close to the couple, and raising her bright eyes and velvet forepaws, sat and gazed at them. A squirrel ran half-way down the furrowed bark of the fallen tree, and there stopped. "We are waiting, Lissy," said the master, in a whisper, and the child smiled. Stirred by a passing breeze, the tree-tops rocked, and a long pencil of light stole through their interlaced boughs full on the doubting face and irresolute little figure. Suddenly she took the master's hand in her quick way. What she said was scarcely audible, but the master, putting the black hair back from her forehead, kissed her. And so, hand in hand, they passed out of the damp ales and forest odours into the open sunlit road. End of Part 1 of Mliss,